All right. Yep. Let's go. But yeah, like I just can't. When art is not beautiful, it's like this is just like you just wasted all of whatever time and material you put into this. To me, that's like pure destruction, and yeah, I just can't with that. LB, did you cut out on me? Oh boy. All right, he'll be back. All right, so
That was a
anyway,
weird thing. Sorry.
yeah, it's showing you not having video right now. Is that like a thing
Hang on.
or?
It's something happened and my computer just accidentally like locked itself. I
All
don't know
right.
why.
Well,
All right,
I can hear you.
I'm gonna unplug and plug in. I won't lose audio, but I just to get my camera working again.
All right, we'll edit this out in post, and he'll be all right. Just whenever you get back, let me know.
For sure.
But yeah, if you can still hear me, like I cannot do it with art that is ugly. I just
Yep.
can't. This is like pure destruction for me. That's why like it's like it seems like people associate the left with creativity and all that. I just can't. They're only creative when it comes to destroying things. And just
Mhm.
like there's a million ways to get it wrong. They seem to be creative when it comes to finding every last one of those ways to get things wrong.
Yeah.
And like real artwork should be like pretty and beautiful, and should inspire you and have real meaning to it, and like it's inspiring. It uplifts your spirit.
Yeah.
That was like why the old cathedrals were so amazing, like, and you had to look up
Mhm.
at them. You physically had to incline your head to, and it makes you like subconsciously uplift your mind and think about higher things than yourself.
Yes. Yes, very much
And
so.
yeah, and like I do not get that in modern art. So like maybe the left is creative, but their creativity is like garbage.
Well, let's we may as well let's belabor that for a second because I've been frankly since we've been introduced, right? And we've been talking
Mhm.
for however long it's been.
Yeah,
Um Almost seems like forever, almost seems like not long and not long at all. But there is that it
going on 2 years.
is it really? Yeah,
Yeah, going
I
on
guess it will be
almost.
2 years. Yeah, shit. Um but I think there's an interesting part of that of where does creativity decide. So you and I have like a general disagreement where I don't think we can use these terms as exclusively as you might use them in some case, but what I will
Mhm.
admit is that politically speaking, the left is being the enemy agents of chaos, if you will. Those are that is the enemy, right? The leftist who is chaotic in many respects is the enemy of humanity. And
It's the revolutionary
what
spirit.
popped into my was that
They're the revolutionary spirit. Yeah.
yeah, as we'll kind of get into with this, but what also popped into my head as you were talking there is kind of me describing to a friend why somebody else that we both know is, like why is this guy, like this guy is, I mean, honestly, the dude is legitimately like has like some racial sentiments that are not even PC. It's not. It's just
Huh.
like if you like when you actually get and this is just a me thing and not just a me thing, but like, and this is why in the post libertarian moment defined, I made it the point to say what it is not is like when you actually come across somebody who's being like legitimately bigoted,
Yeah.
it's one of the most, for me, it's incredibly uncomfortable. And
Yeah.
also like, it's just like, oh, really? Like you don't just see the humor in this stuff, you actually believe it. And he was
Yeah,
like,
it's unironic for you. For us,
yeah.
it's like, we might joke about it, but like there's
Mhm.
nothing about it that's really serious. Like, I mean, you're like half Latino, right?
Right.
I'm uh, married to a Chinese chick, so
Yeah.
yeah.
And
And
it's
by the way, she is unironically racist. Yeah, she grew up that way. That's like when you're at like 99% everyone looks Chinese. It's like,
mhm.
yeah, you really, yeah, it's like you notice race.
But even
Eh,
some of that because I deal with East Asians for work too. Some of it is actually it's not even the because I think I chose that word bigoted for a reason
mhm.
because there's noticing difference and then there's being
Yeah,
bigoted. And then it like
yeah,
cuz like and while yes, East Asians do have a little more of that overt they're going to call they're going to say some things, right? If you get
yeah.
them in a certain situation. Um I've also know they're also just as a general like noticing of things, right? Like they're just not going to
Mhm.
where
Well,
they
and
might,
they haven't been trained to self-censor because they
yeah,
didn't grow up that way.
right, yeah,
It's like
exactly.
that they did, but they're trained to self-censor on different things. You know what I
Hmm.
mean?
That's exactly where I was going with it.
You
So anyway, so
self-censor when it comes to politics, not when it comes to like race or whatever. They don't self-censor when it's that
yeah.
because they grew up where everyone was like 99% looks like them. So
Hmm. And so what popped into my head though was just this thought of like the creative kind of has to serve somebody else, right? And so in the modern day, maybe that's that in the world that we live in, kind of within this motif of how we're talking about liberalism, maybe that kind of answers the question why most creatives think that they're automatically left of the left, right? As it
yeah.
were. The same way in which I had a tweet thread about this that I'm going to turn into a piece kind of when Matt Iglesias, who was one of the founders of Vox, if memory serves, where he was kind of discussing the whole he's like, he kind of like put out the whole like, why is it that there aren't that many conservatives in academia, especially at the highest levels of institution? And it's like, because if you're a little bit different, they suss you out real quick. And then you basically have to decide whether you're going to keep pushing again. Like this was told to me,
Oh
like
yeah.
I'm not going to like I'm not trying to overblow my story or like my pedigree or anything like that because I don't have a pedigree in academia. But I did spend some time and I almost did go the post grad route. And it was said to me of like, yeah, you shouldn't apply to these schools, right? Like it's going to be difficult for you to find your way in a post grad program in philosophy, having an explicitly anti-Marxist worldview, which is basically where
Yeah.
I was at the time. Like this is a known thing. And so it's, and like, you learn about it's like, oh, and like some people say that that conservatives and the right are discriminated against. And that's just silly. The left wing, so it's kind of like, but it's this
No.
network effect and this generational selection that eventually means that you don't realize you have any place to go. And I think what's fascinating is how we are starting to see that shift. I think the Daily, like this whole like the Daily Wire doing this whole razor company thing, and the advertisement that they put out for it. I'm sure you saw that.
No,
But
I didn't. What was that?
so the guy, he was actually on Timcast, and I was surprised. It's the first time ever hearing from this guy. Apparently, he's like the co-CEO of the Daily Wire, but they just launched a competitor to Harry's Razors,
Oh,
because
really?
Harry's Razors like a year ago pulled all their advertising from the Daily Wire and was basically like, these guys suck. They're not in alignment with our values. And so what they did was they put together a very creative and like well done advertisement that was just kind of like, hey, I'm really cool and I'm making a razor company. Exactly what all those places really did
Yeah.
at their beginning. It's like, and you know what? They don't want your business. They don't think that you're good enough for them. So we're going to go ahead and give you a razor ourselves. And it's the guy's name is like Larry or something like that. And he's first time I've ever
I'll have
really
to start
seen
buying
him.
from them.
What?
I will start buying from them
Well, it's like I'm kind of thinking about it too because I need to get more razors because like
and shave.
I gotta I gotta trim up the sides a little bit, and
Yeah.
I always mean to buy them, and I'm like, yeah, maybe I'll just do it. And but it is one of those things of we're starting to see
Yeah.
where because growing up that was a given, right? If you're creative, you must be a liberal
Yeah.
or have a left wing sentiment. And I think that's again where we're starting to see the way things are shifting, what I'm calling the first political realignment,
Yeah.
really, is there's plenty of creative people. Like I've done music, I've done physical art, I do this, I do, I'm a singer, I'm a dancer, I'm a writer. Like there's creativity in these veins, and
Mhm.
like and so to pretend that it's to present and it's that's the difference I think between
And you notice that
conservatism and the
they're
right.
starting to censor too on the left. Like that's like the antithesis of creativity. Like when you've got nothing left, that's what you do. Is you just suppress everybody else's creativity
Yeah,
because you can't win in the market.
yeah, and
So
and of course we see this is when was the last time you saw? I mean, frankly, one of the more interesting movies I saw recently was it's called A Hero, I think, and
mhm,
it's an Iranian film. It's like, so like for the
mhm.
progressive, it's like, ooh, Iranian, but like you watch it, it's all the entire movie is about honor, and like
Ooh,
and this
I
guy,
don't
right,
like that one.
yeah, so it's very much about it's like the movie, to be brief, is kind of like about this guy who's in jail for a debt, and and he has like a girlfriend, and he's trying to figure out, and you can tell he's kind of like a schemer, you know what I mean? But he also is kind of trying to do the right thing. And so then then the big plot is whether he really has a change of heart or whether he's just scheming at the end of the day. But the point had to go, and you'll like this, with the incentive structure of what he had to do, right? Like, what does this guy have to do to try and make himself free? Well, he has to make himself a good person and talk about his honor, and like, regardless of the veracity of
that right there is such a good segue, because I think that's
by the way,
that might be this chapter, it might be the next.
To your mic, by the way, I can't hear you very well.
You hear me?
Yeah, that's much better.
But yeah, that's actually a really good segue into what we're going to talk about. I think tonight, but probably, but definitely next time. But where we're talking about liberty. What is it? This is what why I like the Catholic definition of liberty, or like really not even the Catholic definition. This was like the pre-liberalism definition of liberty, was like the ability to choose the good without constraint. And basically, because if you're choosing the bad, you're just choosing a different kind of chains. Like, even you can go back to Aristotle, and that idea is right there, that there really is no freedom in choosing license, because all you're doing is just giving away liberty. It's like just ontological. You can't. It's unavoidable. You can't. There is no real liberty in choosing license. And so, when he definitely goes into it in this chapter. We're going to start off on the first page with it, but this is like that idea right there, that this guy, in order to be free, he has to make himself a better person. So he basically has to like free himself from sin, at least in his Iranian Islamic conception of it, which is obedience to Allah. But I mean Muslims and Christians basically agree on like 99% of like the lowest tier of morality. There's 3 tiers of morality. The lowest tier is basically common to all religions, pretty much. And so that's, I mean, it's very little disagreement there. Second and third tiers are where all the disagreements like come in. But that first tier of morality is like, like, if you want to be a free person, you have to basically abide by these cardinal virtues, and inhabit the sort of the spirit of God, basically.
Yes. Well, and it's it's also worth as we're kind of, because it very much, this is against liberalism, right? This entire everything that we're talking about here. But I do think, kind of in that transitionary period, and I'll be interested to see where where the author takes it. But like, I'm always reminded of Adam Smith writes Wealth of Nations, but he also writes On Moral Sentiments. This is something Glenn Beck has talked about forever. And so it's not, and when you read somebody like Mises, you see that as well. It's really not until it's, and Mises is the last knight of liberalism, right? That's his biography. So we really, you might say, while we have the currents kind of the Rousseaus, or the who's the other guy I don't like, of the Rousseaus and the Hobbesian. Although Hobbes, I have more of a respect for Hobbes these days than I did when I was 19 years old. And interesting enough as it relates to the Islamic world, but let us not get distracted. My only point is to say, it's not to say that there weren't people of the liberal tradition who didn't recognize the need for morality, or moreover that you should choose the good. They started with the conclusion of morality and made that the foundation, when really it should have been like the roof or the capstone. It's like the finishing or the drywall. It is like the conclusion of having laid a good foundation and good incentive structures, and everything that came before. But they started with a conclusion and made it the foundation. Like, that's not liberty is the goal. It's not the foundation. Yeah, and and this is, sorry, I know we're supposed to start reading, but like, how is that not obvious? Like, I'm not somebody who likes to do these dumb kind of what's wrong with people? But seriously, how is it like, why even in like our little niche, like, where did that supplantation happen? because that you know, that liberty is not the goal. Liberty is the thing in itself. I think.
Well, I think that it's that they start with self-ownership. They start with the idea that I own myself, therefore I'm free. And he does get into this here, that argument here was like, I am born free, therefore I should stay free. It's like, no, you're not. You're born into obligation and and sin. It's like there's all kinds of ways you are not free. Like when you were, and like, just think about, like, logically, when you're a baby, everybody else makes decisions for you. You do not do that for yourself because you do not have that capacity. Heck, when you're in your late teens, you still don't have that capacity. You have more of it, but you still really don't.
Yeah.
I mean, I think about my younger, like, I was very precocious at 18.
Same.
And yeah, I'm sure. And yeah, you probably more than me, by the way. But yeah, it's like I still think of my 18-year-old self like, you fucking doofus.
I was, like, honestly, I look back at who I was or who I am, and it's I'll watch videos that I did because I've like kept video diaries at different times, and again, music, other things like that where it's come out, and sometimes I don't recognize myself. And
well, it's like I look back on my 18-year-old self the way my 18-year-old self looked back on like my middle school self. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like you're just like, oh god, it was so embarrassing.
Yeah, and personally, I just see this person who was like searching for an identity that would stick, or thinking he had to maybe go outside of it. And, like, we can get into the particulars of my upbringing. That's kind of like the reason for that self-growth, blah blah blah. But like the point is, it's funny how when you're in the moment, you think so much of yourself, and that's where it's like the dumbest thing we can teach society. And ironically, I think traditional Indian culture does this differently. Like the dumbest thing you can teach society is that a 20-year-old is the one who's supposed to change the world. Like,
exactly.
Or really an 18, 19-year-old. And I think the way
historically
I remember
it's like late 20s, early 30s. Yeah.
The way I remember
Let's go ahead and get
like
into the
that
reading.
was the time where you're supposed to have a kid. And then in traditional Indian culture, you do your study kind of like in that late 20s to early 30s. And then after that, you move into the more teaching role, where now it's your job to bring up the younger generation, which of course we don't have that meta narrative anywhere in American culture anymore.
Because like at 18, you still you can't teach. You have no clue what's going on. You know what I mean? It's that you don't even begin to get that until like your late 20s, and so that you shouldn't even consider starting to teach until then. And yet we bring 22-year-olds into the classroom to teach kids. Whoops.
Yeah.
All right, let's go ahead and get going.
Let's do it.
All right. Chapter 2, 17 minutes in, or almost 18 minutes in. Chapter 2, Liberalism and the Natural Order. And right here at the beginning, the quote: liberty is not at the beginning, but at the end. It is not at the root, but in the flowers and the fruits. Charles Maurras. There is a work that I recommend, particularly to those who want to have a concrete and complete outline of liberalism, in order to be able then to prepare exposés on liberalism, intended for people who are little conversant with this error, with its ramifications, and who are accustomed to, in quotes, think liberally, even among Catholics attached to the tradition. There are often those who do not realize the depth of the penetration of liberalism in all of our society and our families. Wow, is that dated? That's way. It's like, I know he's writing this in the in the 80s. Like, buddy, this is way. Like this, 40 years later, it's like, nope, no question, it's definitely everywhere.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so this is a little bit dated, but anyway. It is easily recognized that the, in quotes, advanced liberalism of Giscard d'Estaing in the years around 1975 brought France to socialism. But it is believed in all good faith that the liberal right, in quotes, can deliver us from totalitarian oppression. Some well-meaning people do not know really whether they should approve of or find fault with the liberalization of abortion, but they would be ready to sign a petition to liberalize euthanasia. In actual fact, everything that carries the label of liberty has been, for 2 centuries, surrounded with a halo of prestige that surrounds this word that has become sacrosanct. Nonetheless, it is by this word that we are perishing. It is liberalism that is poisoning civil society as well as the church. Therefore, let us open with this book of which I am speaking to you, Liberalism and Catholicism, by Father Roussel, published in 1926, and let us read that page which depicts liberalism very concretely, pages 14 through 16. Adding to this a little commentary. In quotes, the liberal is a fanatic for independence. He extols it to the point of absurdity in every domain. Where have we seen that before? Today? Just earlier today with a very certain someone, who very clearly extols liberty to like the point where it is like logically absurd.
Right. Well, and it's a great and very much very much with the whole concept of unaided reason as well, which again, if you look at any real student of philosophy understands this, right? Even if you are, I guess maybe not like the super postmodernist, but even them, anybody with like enough training would have to understand that, because even the postmodernists have to cling to something in order for their reason to actually get somewhere.
Yeah, you need some sort of foundational knowledge,
right? Or deconstructionism, right?
Because reason is not like a foundation; it's a vehicle. It's how you get to a place. So saying I arrived at this location, therefore this was the because I used reason to get there, therefore it's the right location. It's like, well, no, that's like saying I was meaning to go to church, but I arrived at the strip club, but I did so by driving in my car, which is my vehicle. So therefore it's the right location.
Yeah.
It's like, no, that's not correct at all. And
I always like to say we have the capacity for reason, right? Another term to be used was the faculties of reason. It's people who treat reason and logic as an end are wrong. And anybody who and what's funny is those people are eminently logical in their formulations.
Well, no, they treat reason itself as an authority, which always means their reason. You know what I mean?
Precisely. Yeah.
In practice, it always means like their reason, which so that you can't you can't. I just brain farted. Fuck.
Well, I wanted to bring up quickly before we get too far into it, because there was a couple things I don't know if we said it. I don't know if we said it on or off the air.
Descartes and Kant. That was where I was going.
But so this is a French translation. So this is a French bishop who wrote this, just for Pete, because it helped me put some of the words into context a little bit more when I understood it was from French. So this is a French translation is what we're reading here.
Yeah, and this is why with like guys like Kant and Descartes, they rely so heavily on reason, and they're like, no, I can't understand things through my senses. I can't because my senses might deceive me. It's like, well, your reason's not that, it's like probably worse. Most people have better senses than they do logic and reason. So it's like, why do you think you're different? I mean, do you really think your logic and reason are better than your eyes and ears? It's like, and I think it's a very difficult argument for people to make, because like it's not like you can say because if you don't trust your senses, why would you trust your reason? It's like, if your senses can deceive you, can't your reason deceive you all the better?
Yes, which is what the skeptics will say, right? Is like it's your reason is influenced by your sense data, so that to the degree we can even trust reason is in question as well. Yeah, right. Which is why so that brings up the question of whether like
can you know anything at all? I mean, you destroy epistemology when you say that my senses deceive me. It kind of presumes that okay, in order for your senses to deceive you, they would have to get it right most of the time. You know what I mean? In order for you to be deceived, because then you couldn't even know you were being deceived. You wouldn't even have a concept of that. And so and that's, by the way, it's like one, major disproof of, the nominalism of Kant and Descartes as well, just right off the bat, that is that, your senses have to be reliable in order for them to actually deceive you, because like the best deceptions are like 99% truth. You know what I mean? Like, and so they must, your senses must get it right most of the time. So and by the way, your logic based on that has a way worse batting average. you know, or at least for the average person, definitely for the average person.
Yeah.
Even
Well,
for and for the average midwit, oh my god, it's like overwhelmingly bad.
yeah. Well, and it's this idea, it feeds back into this point of not taking things to the absurd level,
Mhm.
right? Because you can, and I think,
And which is what reason does. Your senses don't do that to you. They do not like absurdly deceive you. It's like, you know, I mean, it's like I can't, like, you know, I might notice that you know, like you know, with like Descartes, you know,
yeah,
he was, you know, he argued that, you know, I can put like a pencil or in a glass of water and it looks like the pencil breaks,
yep.
and so therefore my eyes are deceiving me. It was like, well, my sense of touch can just like pick it up and, you know, then, you know, correct the and, you know, it is not even a real deception if I understand, like, okay, what refraction is, that light just moves slower through water.
Yeah.
And
This is something to this is something to learn from and to account for. It doesn't mean that sense data per se is at fault. Now I do think it's important to understand the way in which your senses can be fooled, right? I think that's an important avenue. And there's, again, to this point of maximalism, right? Because there are things you can do from a teaching perspective.
Yeah.
You know, like so Plato's Socrates talked about recollection, and it just as a quick thing of it, but the whole idea was that all knowledge exists inside of us, we just have to rediscover it effectively. And he used
no.
right, and he used geometry as an example for this. And so in I think it's not, is it Credo? I think it's Credo. It's one of the 5 dialogues where
That sounds right.
where he goes and he like takes a servant and he like teaches, he's like, you know, he's showing how this servant can deduce geometry. And when I was kind of writing about this, I was like, well, I think what Socrates has just done is like basically discovered one of the best ways of teaching, right? Which is like asking questions, is the Socratic method of asking questions and having people answer them. So like, so it's, but you can see that maximalism in the idea of recollection, where it's like, well, then this means that all information is inside of us and that it only needs to be drawn out and it's equally inside of every single person.
Yeah. And I was going to say about like Descartes and particularly Kant. It's like, this is why you cannot have a morality that is purely based on reason, because you know, it presumes, you know, the rest of reality. It presumes foundationalism. So if you it like truth itself is, you know, I think he defines it differently. You know, where it's a well, we get into it here where like the mind is, where he says the mind is like a camera, and yeah, we get into that here. Perfect.
Yeah. All right, let's keep reading.
But basically let's go ahead and continue. But yeah, like by the way, you know, if you wanted to see a real Kantian, you know, look at Ace. You know what I mean? His morality is purely based on reason. It's based on.
I threw down the gauntlet today, man. And he's refusing to you know, go. He's refusing to have a conversation. Like, I'm not going to sit here and pretend. And like, I'm guilty of it, obviously. But I'm not going to sit here and pretend that a Twitter exchange is going to move the needle in any way, right? It's so entertainment. Stupid. Twitter is WWE.
Yeah. And it's like, if you want to have a real debate, do it you know, with like Bart Claire or Caleb and you know, and do a real debate that way. Like, when I'm using Ace, he's kind of just a useful foil.
Yeah, you still got like double the followers I do. So I mean, as long as you have more followers than me, I'll go after you sometimes. Sure. That's my rule.
But yeah, and you see that, like, you know, where it says again right here, getting back to the text, that the liberal is a fanatic for independence. He extols it to the point of absurdity in every domain. Is through this use of reason, because your sense of reason is by far your shittiest sense. Like, of your, you know, 6 senses, reason is by far the worst of them.
Well, and it's the one that needs to be cultivated the most, precisely because of that. Yeah, because it relies, because it's that mechanism by which we interface between the, you know, in my schema, the multiple levels of human like the human being, because consciousness is a specific thing now. So the idea of being, like, reason is the way you harmonize and move between the various elements. Whereas, yeah, to your point, if you see a snake, you don't have to know what kind of snake it is to know that snakes are dangerous.
Well, it's like reason is a sense-making apparatus. You know, it's like, you know, it is a 6th sense in that it is the one that makes the sense of all of the other senses, which are foundational. Right. And so if you have a an idea, an ideology, or a more morality system that is, divorced from your senses, like divorced from foundationalism, divorced from consequences and reality, is like definitionally this is going to be retarded, because now you've completely broken your sense making apparatus. But that way, that just having morality that is divorced from your senses is just, I mean, this is never going to work. This is absolutely going to end in the absolute absurdity. Can you reason your way to true morality? Theoretically, yes. It's extraordinarily difficult. No one's ever done it, and at least not without help, not all by themselves, not like in a cave.
And what you see is a lot of those people at the end of it find a form of spirituality to complement their reason. Whether, a lot of people find find Jesus through a quest of reason, where they say, well, let me go and disprove this. And it's really only the, I think, unless you like approach it, because I think if you approach it with a sober mind, you at least you invariably get to the point where you see the benefits of religion. Right. And like we're past this new atheism moment when like people like Sam Harris can fade away into obscurity in that regard. It's like we're past this. Yeah.
It's like theoretically possible to reason your way to the idea that God is love, but it's so much easier if he just tells you. You know what I mean? There's nobody in the world who reasoned their way to, God being love. It's, it's only through revelation that we really know that. So you need authority to guide your reason for that. This is why God gives us revelation. He didn't just like leave it all to ourselves. But, we don't believe in a deism God for exactly this reason. Is that we have a God who, it gives us, who has that authority to help us train our reason. He's like, it starts with giving us the right answer. And, then we have to kind of reason our way backwards from there. Here's he's giving us the conclusion because God knows we're never going to figure it out by ourselves if we try. And so, he's like, okay, here's the right answer. Now try to reason with, your way to the rest of reality from this. And we've had some real trouble, to say the very least, but we got way better after he told us the answer, God is love. Like that single statement changed everything in human history, because like, oh, now we have the right answer, and now human progress can actually begin. You know what I mean? And there's no accident that the Catholic Church, who was like the church that took that by far the most seriously, was the one that built all of everything good about Western civilization. And the Protestants who broke the truth-making apparatus, because again, so this is why everything's kind of gone to shit since then. Because now we need to kind of get back to the actual first truth of revelation that, hey, God is love, and begin building our society, civilization from there on up again, and which is what we had been doing, but we had a departure in the 16th century, to say the very least. Let's go ahead. All right. So the liberal is a fanatic for independence. He extols it to the point of absurdity in every domain. So there you have a definition. And we are going to see how it is applied. What are the liberations that liberalism insists on? Number one, the independence of the true and of the good in regard to being. This is the relativistic philosophy of mobility and of becoming. The independence of the intelligence with regard to its object being sovereign. The reason does not have to submit itself to the object. It creates it. And whence the radical evolution of truth of relativistic subjectivism. Let me scroll down the page.
I do think he makes a little too much of the subjectivism, but that could be me just, special pleading, because I do see there are differences in in a relativist view of the world versus taking the subjective understanding of reality into account. But I don't know that a priest is supposed to recognize that, I think.
Explain that.
So how I've tried to describe it is that I think I personally can recognize the inherent subjectivity of the differences in how you or I perceive things based off of different factors and criteria. However, that it doesn't follow from that everything is relative. right? So
Okay.
yeah, so I think, and again, like that's where and it also, frankly, in regards to the becoming aspect of things too, because things do, there is an element to existence that is about becoming, right? We just spent a good bit of
Yeah.
time
It's
talking
not a
about,
foundational
yeah,
element, though.
who we were into who we are, right? And that's really a river that flows through time. There, and it's and it just and there's that necessary moving that kind of happens. I think there's a tendency of a certain mind, um and certainly you see this in the rationalism of like a Descartes or a Kant as well. And this is the folly of it, is this idea of these immutable categories that we can create that are timeless, and the idea that something that our mind is that our reason, that human reason, is going to create as being
Mhm.
timeless is kind of, again, is a folly, right?
Yeah.
Because of the imperfections that exist within human reason.
Yeah, I mean, it's by far the worst of our six senses. It's the sense making apparatus itself. It's by
Mhm.
far the worst of the of the six.
Yeah.
And so the anyway, he says, let us emphasize two key words: subjectivism and evolution. Subjectivism means introducing freedom into the intelligence, whereas on the contrary, the nobility of the intelligence consists in submitting itself to the object, that is, in the adequatio or conformity of the thinking subject with the known object. The intellect works like a camera. It must fit with precision the intelligible touches of reality. Its profession consists in its fidelity to the real. It is for this reason that the truth is defined as the conformity of the intellect with the thing. Do you disagree with that at all?
No, and I think this might be just this might just be a
Okay.
terms thing, again, like coming from that translation, because
Mhm.
um so it's the so because I
Again,
don't
this was originally written in French,
right,
so.
and that's kind of where it's like I'm kind of trying to figure out how he's using the word subjectivity in this regard, because I don't, because like subjectivity is that thing of like, you see the guy on opposite sides of the six, one guy says six, one guy says nine, and the
Yeah, or
reality
like
is,
the duck or the rabbit.
yeah, do you see
Yeah.
the duck or the rabbit? And like you can kind of see things depending on where your perspective is. And of course, but I think what he's talking about here is more, so if I, like, so this Apple pen, right? This is a pen, this is a stylus, it's a piece of plastic, it's a lot of things. What he's talking about here is the idea that, well, what if this is what if this isn't a pen? It's like, well, no, this is a pen. And that's really what he's
Mhm.
driving at here,
What
is
if
the
I'm not a man? What if I'm a woman? You
yes,
know?
that's a, yeah, exactly. It's like, oh, here we have this complex organism. Well, if it's complex, that means it can be many things. And the idea, and it's more about, I think that's what he's referring to when he says introducing freedom
Freedom.
into the
I don't have to
intelligence.
view this thing the way it actually is. Yeah.
Correct. And
Again,
moreover,
yeah.
we shouldn't be worried about seeing things for what they are. And that's what he's going with, the conformity of the intellect with the thing. So
Yeah.
are we interested in I talk about understanding. I'm interested in understanding something. I'm not interested in creating a world that I can
Mhm.
that works perfectly for me. And I think,
Mhm. But we
I
can
think
see
that's
that
what he's driving at.
his definition of subjectivism is 100% on display in liberalism today, which again, like the transgender stuff, where I can if you're looking at objectively, you at that one swimmer, you're like, that's a dude with a dong. I mean, you
Yeah.
can see his cock and balls through through his swimsuit.
Yep.
It's clearly a dude, and yet we're like, we have to say this is a woman because he subjectively views himself. Oh god, I'm so going to get canceled. God damn it.
Oh, well,
I'm
it's
so getting. Yeah, it's like he subjectively views himself as a chick, and therefore the rest of us have to conform to him. I mean, literally, it is the reverse of what he's saying right here, where instead the liberal seeks to make reality conform to them by force, and rather than conform themselves to reality. And exactly because of this right here. And again, he was like, there he's writing this back in the 80s. He's just like, you don't always see it. Like, nope, you definitely see it now. Like wide awake, crystal clear.
Well, and you wouldn't see it. And to the point, I think it's a sign of the times that we live in, that it's become so pronounced. I mean, it is the adage of, if you give
this in the 80s.
Yeah, if you give a mouse a cookie, he'll ask for a glass of milk.
Exactly.
Right? Like, it's a little bit here, a little bit there, and suddenly what maybe he wouldn't get into is how that social control actually reinforces itself.
Yeah, that'd be a really good way of putting it. Yeah,
and it's a reinforcement mechanism, because of course you can't look with your eyes, right, and say, well, that doesn't look like a woman.
Yeah,
we're not allowed.
Looks like
you're not allowed to
dress.
make that determination anymore, right? And so it's a basic betrayal of that. And that's what he's talking about with conforming, that your intellect has to be conformed.
He does get into that kind of, at the end, because he does say, I mean, that's the title of this episode, that, hey, liberalism definitely leads to totalitarianism. But it is through this self-reinforcing aspect that it does that.
Yeah.
All right, let's continue. Truth is the quality of the thought by which it is in accord with the thing, with that which is. It is not the intellect that creates things. It is the things that impose themselves onto the intellect, such as they are. Therefore, the truth of what is affirmed depends on that which is. It is an objective thing. The person who is searching for the truth has to renounce himself, to renounce any construction of his own mind, to renounce any idea of having invented the truth. That's right. You don't invent truth. You discover it. It's like Columbus didn't invent America. He didn't make America. He discovered the Americas where people had already been living for tens of thousands of years.
Right. Precisely.
Yeah. Anyway,
he didn't make the world round. The world, right? Like the world. Yeah.
But I made this point earlier. Like, if you reasoned your way, to the idea that the world was flat, would that make it so? No. If you reasoned your way to to believe that a man is a woman, would that make it so? No. If you reasoned your way to morality being a certain way, would that make it so? No. And that one, I guarantee that one will trigger a lot of the more Kantians. Anyway, on the contrary, in subjectivism, it is the reason that constructs truth. We have the submission of the object to its subject. Again, the rest of us having to pretend that a man is a woman when he's like crushing women's swimming records. It's literally, we have to do it by force now. It's not simply subjective. It's subjective at gunpoint. It's their opinions at gunpoint, or really the risk of cancellation and social ostracism. The subject becomes the center of all things. Things are no longer what they are, but what I think. In such a case, a man disposes of truth according to his own taste, like if he just wants to be a woman. And, or if he wants to believe that, all morality is based on self-ownership, equally egregious errors.
Yeah.
And as a consequence, the truth will be different, according to individuals and social groups. Yes, again, we see this as, my truth. You don't know what it's like to be black, therefore you can't comment on anything, or you don't know what it's like to be a woman, therefore shut up about how abortion is mass murder.
Right. Yeah, this is as Mises would put it, the polylogism of Marx, right? The inherent idea that the conflicting classes have no real interaction with each other.
And he actually does get into disproving that in the last one, I think. Nice. Yeah, in the last chapter, he says, actually, the corporations were like the unity mechanism of civilization. You have the shareholders, the rich people at top, the middle, and the middle management, and in the middle, they're the middle class, and your customers at the bottom, who are like the poor and the workers and all that. It's like, this was a unifying mechanism where each class of society had vested interests in other people, and again, the Catholic truths got it right pretty quickly, and so as a consequence, the truth will be different according to individuals and social groups. The truth is then necessarily shared. No one can claim to have it exclusively in its wholeness. It is made and it is sought after without end. It can be guessed how contrary that is to our Lord Jesus Christ and to his church. Historically, it is this emancipation. One moment, let me scroll down. Where is it? Historically, this emancipation of the subject in relation to the object, to that which is, was brought about by four persons. Luther at first refused the magisterium of the church and kept only the Bible. Since he rejected every created intermediary between God and man, he introduced the free investigation, starting with the false notion of scriptural inspiration, individual inspiration. He believed he himself, could discern what was inspired and what was not. And therefore, you could, if you could say, hey, what is God breathed? You can say what is, basically what God is. You can say what truth is, and you can say what the rest of reality is. Because of that, this is where because you have this ability, this anyone can interpret the Bible, idea. Literally, this is where you get this idea of subjective truth from. This is where it came from.
Yes,
right there.
Yeah, and to make one point, so I was at least taught that part of what gave rise to philosophy was the Greeks, at least in the Western sense, was the Greeks coming into contact with different religions, right, and different practices, and so it was their attempt at a way to harmonize between various religious practices as well. And I think that's where that's one of the reasons why I like Joseph Pfeiffer in one of the books, and the book that I read by him, where he talks about the idea of philosophy being the counter melody to religion. The other way I've put it is that like religion is the thing that gives you the truth, whereas philosophy for people who want it it's about discovering it, not for for yourself, but it's kind of like, well, it's
discovering the rest of whatever truth that religion didn't give you.
Yeah, right. Or even just going about it maybe it's taking I also see it frankly as taking a longer, more convoluted path a lot of the times to arrive at a similar conclusion.
Yeah, I think the idea of even a path, it applies fixed principles and fixed facts about reality that which can be used for as fuel for reason. You can't reason your way from point to point to point if points don't exist.
Precisely.
And so religion, it gives you a whole lot of points that you wouldn't otherwise know exist. It gives you that revelation that actually reality is over here. It's this way. And where you might be searching in every direction, not knowing that exact one is the it's the right one, and there's endless count of possibilities. Religion tells you, it helps you get rid of all of the endless possibilities and shrink it all the way back to one. One particular truth, that which is God. God is God is truth. God is he is the truth, right. And in other words, he is the first truth. He is the central truth. He is the first truth. That which everything else is based off of. And but what is God? God is love. So anyway, so like when you and you would just you could never you theoretically could reason your way to God is love. It's just virtually impossible. You couldn't do it if you didn't already know it. And it's so much easier for him to just here's the right answer. Because God, and then reason your way out from there, synthesize this with the rest of the way you view reality, and this will give you a true epistemology.
Well, and Luther, to the point, was also dealing with a world where what used to have to be done by clerics and priests over the course of days, namely writing a book, physically writing and copying the book. Yeah. It was a world in which more people could print and more people could access information. And so there's this, so suddenly the gates are swung open, and it's like, well, everybody can walk in here. It's like, well, no, not everybody can walk here. And not everybody should walk here as well.
You've seen that on Twitter. Twitter's a sewer for that reason.
Most people Twitter would not be fun if you took an IQ test beforehand.
Oh yeah.
because
That's a really good way to put it.
literally everything that's bad about Twitter would be solved as if you had to take a basic IQ test and you were sorted into different groups, because you would immediately be able to tell the difference between somebody who's it would follow. It would map on almost exactly. And this isn't to say that I'm some vastly superior intellect, right? It's just a basic thing. Once you start to understand that the person who is an idiot, like, might be a good person in other areas of their life, but isn't intellectually acute, that person comes across the same on Twitter as the
Twitter,
best
where I can get rid of
possible.
the imbeciles. Oh, that's a great idea. That
Yeah.
sounds like a next great startup.
Well, but you can also apply this even for yourself, so you can kind of understand. Oh, well, when somebody has a really bad opinion, well, maybe they're just literally incapable of it, right?
Yeah.
And that's and so whatever.
They have a shit opinion. They must be morons.
Yeah, or they're operating from a different perspective. You know,
Yeah.
like you can have, and that's where but that's also how you can determine the people who are arguing in good faith and in bad faith, and that's really the key. Like, that's one of the reasons why, even though you and I kind of started at odds, we've become friends, because we're both arguing in good faith. We don't have exact crossover in our worldviews, but there's enough there to where we can have fruitful conversations. And that's really, shout out John in the chat. Empathy is power.
Yes.
Right.
And yes.
Yeah.
I agree. All right. So where were we? Okay, Luther at first refused the magisterium of the church and kept only the Bible. Since he rejected every created intermediary between man and God, he introduced the free investigation, starting with the false notion of scriptural inspiration, individual inspiration. Then, Descartes, followed by Kant, systematized subjectivism. The intellect is closed up on itself, and it knows only its own thought. This is the cogito of Descartes and the categories of Kant. Things themselves are unknowable. Finally, in Rousseau, emancipated from its object, having lost common sense, yes, that's a really good way of putting it, the subject is left without defense, faced with the common opinion. Basically, because you got rid of the 5 common senses we basically all have. You literally got rid. This is what what is like. Here are the senses we have in common, and it is the way we view reality. The way we view reality. We can literally look at things and have this, and that is the only commonality. When you say that truth is self-derived, apart from the senses, no wonder we all don't have common sense anymore. We literally got our sense-making apparatuses literally got rid of the common senses. It's 5 of them. We have 5 common senses. Our 6th sense, reason, the sense-making apparatus itself, is completely busted because of that. Because we said that our 5 senses can deceive us sometimes, and no, they don't. In fact, they get it right nearly all of the time.
Well, and because for Rousseau, civilization is the lie.
Yeah.
Right. Completely convoluted.
He just wants to be a jungle man, and
he doesn't. Because if he did, he would. He wants to live in an environment. This is always what I took exception, where I take exception. You want to live in an environment where you can lament the fact that you're not a tribal man or a native or however it would be. Because there were sailors. There were sailors who, when they found the new world, they stayed. You know what I mean? They abandoned ship. They what's the word?
Like, I'm not going back with you guys. It's kind of nice living in the savages, with
precisely.
And so when things themselves are unknowable. And finally, in Rousseau, emancipated from his object, having lost common sense, the subject itself is left without defense, faced with the common.
So Rousseau's term is what's the term he uses? Is like this is Rousseau's social contract. The idea that there is your will and that there is a common will that exists above that. Well, who determines the common will? It's the state. It's the people bullshit. I want to determine it. And so what the bishop is saying here, because this is actually really interesting as I'm reading it again, because what he's saying is, having lost common sense, the subject, the individual, replace the word subject with individual in this case. The individual who's following in this tradition is left without defense, which is to say when I look at Leah Thomas, I see a man, but under the common will, under the common good, right? That there is under the common good, that's supposed to be a woman now. And so therefore I have to give my will, my individuality, my perception of work, my has to fall to that perception, because that is the perception of basically people who exist in positions of power.
It's like, it's not even the like 99% of people. No, it's complete bullshit. And it's like that fraction of 1% that really is just like mentally ill, that now they have the power. And the anyway, and this is exactly what liberalism does to civilizations, where now it's like we have a busted truth a busted sense making apparatus that is literally in charge, forcing everything else to the liberalism itself is forcing reality to conform to its like nuttiness, to its madness. It's that this is like the apex from earlier of this idea that liberalism, that subjectivism is forcing the objects to conform to the subject. Now we literally have people who are just like mental retards forcing everyone to conform to themselves. Like this is so yes, like liberalism definitely ends in totalitarianism. This is why, because it has a busted truth making and sense making apparatus, amongst other problems. But let's continue on.
I think he's really driving at relativism too. So we might use subjectivism and relativism, because I think subjectivism, you can actually derive law from that, because recognizing the subjectivism, which is to say 3 people in 3 different places can have different perceptions of the same object in a society, right? And given that we're social creatures, you have like that's where we can actually derive the necessity for law. It's not that law comes from that, but it's that eventually we have to settle on one thing to unite around. And so so you can even still move yourself out of it in a subjectivist frame. It's the relativistic frame, which is to say everything is equal, right? One perception is just as equal as another. Well, no, that's not how things work. And that's why law breaks. That's why law is breaking down currently in America as we have it right now, because it's considered just as valid to. It's considered not a violation of law now to just walk off with people's property.
Yep, pretty much.
Yeah.
It's under $500, I guess, and so what do? You mark everything up to over $500, and then you give people, customers a discount, coupons at the front.
And where does that come from? That's recognizing the subjective experience of people who are petty criminals, right?
Yeah.
Through no fault of their own. Through sometimes you can still have empathy, but there's still, but again, this is breaking down a basic facet of law. Without law, there can be no society. There can certainly be no civilization on top of that.
Exactly. Yep. So he says, all right, continuing on. The thought of the individual is going to be dissolved into the public opinion. Excuse me. That is to say that what everyone or the majority thinks, and this opinion. Okay, the thought of the individual is going to be dissolved into the public opinion. That is to say what everyone or the majority thinks. Boy, is this right. I can't believe he was 40 years ahead of time on this. And this opinion, which will be created by the techniques of group dynamics organized by the media. Holy shit. Now he's gotten to a media controlled state. A press controlled state 40 years ahead of Yarvin, or 30, I should say. Because it's not just a press controlled state, it's a press controlled world.
Yeah.
Basically. And he says, and this opinion will be created by the techniques of group dynamics organized by the media, which are in the hands of the financiers, the politicians, the Freemasons, etc. Jesus, he's good. Yeah, but like by its own impulse, intellectual liberalism falls into the totalitarianism of thought. After the rejection of the object, we are seeing the evanescence of the subject, which is thus ripe for undergoing all forms of slavery. the subjective, yeah, again, because chaos demands power to put it down and to turn it into order. So now by inviting all of this chaos, you've invited the power to fucking crush you into order.
Mhm.
And but now that you have frauds who don't even know the truth, they're de facto frauds because they couldn't possibly know the truth by their own broken sense making apparatus. So yes, everything they do is necessarily fraud for this reason. So you never get the order. This is the archotropism circuit that I talk about, where chaos demands power to put it down and turn it into order. But if you have a busted sense making apparatus, that means you have a busted your order making apparatus necessarily. So you will always by default get a fraud at that second step, which preserves the chaos. So chaos demands power to put it down, but the people don't know how to restore order. So they just give you a different kind of chaos, which repeats the cycle. So I mean, that's archotropism in a nutshell, and this is why, because liberalism has a busted truth making or a busted sense making apparatus. I keep saying that, but I really want to hit that point home.
And I think so. This next paragraph deals with evolution, and I think
take it away.
But yeah, and I'll read it. I'd like to think what he's driving at is the social Darwinism of the 20th century, which was tied to eugenics versus like evolutionary biology or psychology, such like as a Jordan Peterson or Brett Weinstein, Heather Hine, because and they'll say the same thing, and I think that's like that's a huge key is that the social Darwinism of the 20th century is different from evolutionary theory. And in fact, most of the idea of progressivism and eugenics is the idea of supplanting the natural evolution, right? So just as, again, that's probably a translation thing here. I don't think we're going too far outside of the text.
I read it in the context. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Go ahead. Take it away.
So the second mark of intellectual liberalism we have mentioned is evolution. By rejecting the submission to the real, the liberal is drawn to reject the immutable essences of things. For him, there is no nature of things. There is no stable human nature ruled by definitive laws set down by the Creator. Man is
I think of Sam Harris when I think and on that sentence exactly. Yeah. Like I like someone who believes that human this is de facto blank slateism, because, or tabula rasa, because now you're saying that man, because man evolves, he can evolve into whatever he wants, because he has a will, unlike all other creatures.
And of course, most of the Enlightenment philosophers started, intellectually speaking, from a state of nature and from or what Locke and then Rand would later call a tabula rasa. And of course, given what we understand about evolution today, that's a mistake. So you have to, so that in and of itself debunks most of Enlightenment thought. It's not to say there isn't still good we can draw from it, but you can even just use basic scientific advancements as such as we have them to see the problem with these things. And of course, if you have a decent enough teacher in school, they're going to go over these things with you.
Exactly.
So there is, and we can. I also, let's bring in Thomas Sowell as well as somebody who gets it right in this particular instance.
Exactly.
Man is in perpetual progressive evolution. The man of yesterday is not the man of today. One collapses into relativism. What is more, man himself creates himself. He is the author of his own laws. This would be existentialism of Sartre, which he has to refashion incessantly according to the sole inflexible law of needed progress. Then it is evolutionism in all realms: biological, intellectual, and moral, political, religious. And so he likens biological to Lamarck and Darwin. Again, we can kind of understand that we have a better framework with which to understand Darwin today.
Yeah.
Intellectual rationalism and its myth of indefinite progress of human reason. This is you can tell that's really what he's talking about. It is the social Darwinism of the progressives.
Yes.
And then moral, the emancipation from taboos, political, religious emancipation of societies with regard to Jesus Christ. So the idea of, again, emancipating people from previously held ideas and notions. The crest, you might even just put this in simple terms of Chesterton's fence, right? Is like it, and that's, you can look at emancipation in light of that.
Yeah, I mean, it's the false emancipation where you're emancipated to basically choose slavery.
Yeah.
It's like it's like that old libertarian thing. Like, could you choose to sell yourself into slavery? Oh yeah, for sure. Oh yeah, happens all the time. Yes,
Hmm.
definitely happens today. Yes, it's
Well,
like that. Make the mistake. Intellectual slavery is just as much a slavery as any other kind. It's like demon possession. This is why I love how Matt Erickson calls it like demon possession, because that's really what it is.
hmm yeah, and I think there's and there's a good distinction to make between like, but then you can fall into the trap of saying everything is slavery, right? And so therefore there can be no future.
Well, that
But
might not
that's
be wrong.
right, but that's also a matter of mindset, right? So this is where that subjective element does come into play, because if you perceive yourself as a slave, then you can only know yourself as a slave. Whereas if you perceive yourself as, say, for the context of this conversation, as a son of God, that's a completely different like recognition of who you are as a person.
Yeah.
Um,
I mean, it's an intellectual constraint on your actions and behaviors rather than physical constraints on your actions and behaviors, which is like, okay, granted, the physical one is probably, more obviously bad than the wrong one. Yeah,
yeah.
than the intellectual one, because again, you can't see it, it's really, if you can't see it, it's really difficult to sense it with your sixth sense, your reason is your sixth sense for anyone who's just joining in now. I keep seeing the numbers go up and down. So anyway, go ahead and continue.
The crest of evolutionary delirium is reached with Father Teilhard de Chardin, 1881 to 1955, who affirms in the name of a pseudoscience and a pseudomysticism that matter becomes spirit, that nature becomes the supernatural, that humanity becomes the Christ. A triple confusion of an evolutionist monism irreconcilable with the Catholic faith. For the faith, evolution is death. They speak of a church that evolves. They want an evolving faith. You must, quote, you must submit to the living church, to the church of today. They were writing to me from Rome in the mid 70s, as if the church of today should not be identical to the church of yesterday. I answered them, under those conditions, tomorrow it will no longer be what you are saying today. Those people have no concept of truth, of being. They are modernists. So I think what's useful, again, kind of understanding that evolution in this is not the scientific understanding of evolution. This is the social Darwinism of progress. You can see very well it's the idea of, well, everything has to change. And of course, if you're going to think of any institution within society, the church is that institution which shouldn't change because it already has the answers. That's kind
And
of maybe that's my construction on top of it, but that's kind
oh
of how I've
yes,
looked at
and
it.
he definitely makes that point. He spends whole chapters on that idea, later on, and but yeah, he I forgot. I brain farting. Go ahead and keep reading.
So the second point, so this is the first one again going back is that liberalism insists on the independence of the true and the good in regard to being. This is the relativistic philosophy of mobility and of becoming. And then the second point that we're going to get into is the independence of the will in regard to the intellect. An arbitrary and blind force, the will must not at all be concerned with the judgments of reason. It creates the good, just as reason brings forth the true. In a word, it is arbitrary. Sic volo, sic jubeo, sit pro rationa voluntas. Thus I will, thus I order, let my will be reason.
Oh wow, that was really good, because this is exactly what's come down now with, again, like this totalitarian left, that is, in their will is the only reason you're allowed to have. And it's like, this is the real kind of intellectual slavery,
Mhm.
where you can actually start to see the manifestation of the chains on the intellect
Well, and
and physically.
you can also see how a society that is unconcerned with morality, we might say,
Mhm.
within that society, it is sic volo,
Unconcerned with
sic
truth.
jubeo, sit pro ratione voluntas. It is the idea of my thus I will, thus I order, right? That is what
Hmm.
somebody like a Joe Biden or a Kamala Harris is doing in real time, or the media apparatuses in real time as it relates to foreign
Hmm.
engagements in different parts of the world, or even domestically as it relates to let's say something that happened about a week into January a couple of years ago, we might say, right?
Hmm.
It's like it is not about subjecting the thing. Going back, it's not about subjecting our reason to, like, okay, what are we actually looking at here? It's saying, well, no, this was an insurrection. That's what this was, and this is what everybody must believe. All right
Exactly.
people believe.
Or that, you know, the and you think of them, they're like the highest form of this principle, that, you know, like Kamala Harris and Joe Biden. This is why we call that, because what this is saying right here is that your base instincts, your base passions become imperatives. You cannot choose otherwise, which, you know, basically restores you to the state of an animal, because an animal cannot choose otherwise. Like animals technically have will, but they're not free will. That's what separates them from us, is that, you know, our will is free. We can, you know, do whatever we want with it. And to be uncivilized is to go back towards that, you know, that unfree will. And where you see this the most is at the highest point of society, where all that power is, because now, under that weight, under that's broken sense making apparatus of liberalism, that says that, you know, thus I will, thus is reason. You know, now they're at the point where, you know, Joe Biden, they're basically reptiles. This is why we say that they're reptiles, because they cannot choose otherwise. You know, that they're, you know, this is the weight of the liberal spirit upon them, where they really don't have a choice in the matter anymore.
Well, and you're not allowed to look and see an 80-year-old invalid.
Yeah. Oh,
right?
yeah.
Yeah. So number 3, the independence of the conscience with regard to the objective rule and to the law. Conscience sets itself up as the supreme rule of morality. Interesting. According to the liberal, law limits freedom and imposes onto it a constraint which is, first of all, moral, the obligation, and finally physical, the sanction. The law and its constraints run counter to human dignity and to conscience. The liberal confuses liberty and license. Now our Lord Jesus Christ is the living law, being the word of God. From there we can gauge once more how deep the opposition of the liberal towards our Lord is.
And this, you know, this goes right back to what we said at the beginning about how, you know, even like this is the pre-liberalism definition of liberty, that liberty is the ability to choose the good unconstrained. So basically, you know, it's not that you have the ability to choose good or evil. You know, it was that you could choose the good, because if you chose the evil, you were necessarily in a less kind of freedom. You were necessarily less free. So therefore, you know, if you know, like the wages of sin is death, and basically and Christ says, hey, when you sin, you suffer the slavery. You suffer the slavery to sin. You know, in other words, sin makes you lose liberty definitionally. You know, because you know, you are choosing something where there is no freedom. The truth is what sets you free. You know what I mean? And so when you are you know, so like when you say, like, okay, well, you know, liberty must include like the ability to go, you know, bang prostitutes and, you know, and take all kinds of drugs and, you know, be horrible to your family and, you know, not be grateful to them at all. You know, it's like, that liberty must include these things. It's like, no, liberty must logically exclude these things. It is complete, you know, that is license. That is slavery. It's just a different, you know, when you choose it, you know, that like, though there's no real physical constraint against you, you are physically choosing these kinds of intellectual constraints and physical constraints as well, because the physical constraints are just less obvious. You know, like the idea, you know, against, you know, I never, you know, but yeah, so like you are necessarily choosing something that's less free. Like, I mean, take the parents example, like when you're going to be really ungrateful to your parents and like not take care of them or whatever. Like in the natural order, you know, like if we were in a real anarchist society, a real tribal anarchy society, the way it would work is you're born, they take care of you when you're little, and then when they get old, you take care of them when they're old. You are born to be their retirement package, and you have and they have a responsibility to you to take care of you when you're young, just as you have a responsibility to take care of them when you're old. So when you, as an ungrateful child, spurn that responsibility, you lose all of that, and society loses that freedom. So now that because now your parents are unable to take care of themselves when they're old, and your children are going to repay that to you in kind. And by the way, once you back in the old tribal days, once you did that, you ain't breeding. No one's good, because now the rest of the tribe doesn't trust you. The rest of the community knows you're a dick. So now you've lost all of that protection that you gained from the tribe. So literally, if you were to choose something like this, you could not logically call it liberty, because all you've chosen is a different kind of slavery. It really is a different kind of constraint. There is no there's logically unconstrained sin. It's irrational, is a contradiction in terms. So this is why liberty logically cannot. It's liberty and license necessarily are mutually exclusive logically.
Well, this I'm thinking about in the Jewish tradition, how, or like in the Jewish tradition, if you're an observant Orthodox Jew, electricity is still, turning on the light switch is still considered work. Right. And you're not supposed to have bread in your house over the Passover. And from listening to people, I've learned that, in fact, in a lot of these communities, it's and this is I guess the Talmudic approach, right? Is that what can we get away with but still conform to the law? And again, the law in this instance being God's law.
This is where Jews were notoriously, like, the kind of Talmudic logic is centered around making the tiniest, most nitpickiest difference between things. So it's really, really good at differentiating things as a way of getting around the law. Is it lying, or is it omitting the truth? Lying by omission. You might say, which is which.
And Catholicism makes those distinctions as well, right? And that's why we have the distinctions between venial and mortal sins as well. This next one I had some trouble.
Like Greek sin, as opposed to like Greek logic, which was more centered on like cause and effect. Like they weren't really very good at distinguishing one thing from another, which is something that this is why when the Greeks finally met the Jews, it was a really, really lovely combination, because now you've paired a really good cause and effect sort of logic that was really, really good at that, with something that's also really, really good at making distinctions of one thing between another. And you see this and this marriage culminate in Christianity.
This next one I had some trouble with. The independence of the anarchical powers of feeling with regard to reason. This is one of the characteristics of Romanticism, the enemy of the primacy of reason.
Yeah, I'm not sure what he means. Let's read what he means here, because this was one I didn't quite understand.
Yeah, so he says the Romantic takes pleasure in brewing up slogans. He condemns violence, superstition, fanaticism, integrism, racism, because of what those words conjure up in the imagination and in the human passions. In the same spirit, he makes himself the apostle of peace, of liberty, of tolerance, of pluralism.
Okay, I see what he means here. This is probably one of those French peculiarities where the word probably means something a little bit different in French than it does in English. Because I read Romanticism, that doesn't sound right. But now it seems like he's saying like the feelings, led people, the sentimentality-driven people, that like the artistic passion that that they exude. And these people are but it's the very, very low conscientiousness, high extroversion type.
Gotcha.
That's what he's talking about here.
Right. And so it's this idea, because it just didn't fit with my understanding of Romanticism in that area. But I
love trans bomber pilots. Yay!
Because this is what conjures up in our minds. This is what's conjuring up the thing. It's not about thinking. It's just about feeling good about the thing that you're supposed to feel good about.
Yeah. More women suicide bomb. I'm kidding.
well, right. Yeah. We need women to serve in the military. Why? And not even that we need, because you could, not even we need women to serve in the military. We need women to be in the front lines. We need women to be in special ops, to be integrated into infantry units and Why? Yeah. Not to do with anything with reason. And I think this is maybe what he's driving at here, but it has to do with how that makes us feel.
Yeah.
right? Because on TV, I can create a kick-ass girl character that's 5'2" and 120 pounds soaking wet. And for some
Yeah.
reason she can take out, and like, but she's
Take out
powerful enough.
6'4" dude, 300-pound dudes, like 5 of them at a time. Like,
Well, it's cool because I just finished the show Burn Notice was on USA Network. It's a great show. I'd recommend it to people. It's all about a spy, and it's like, oh look, they're telling us all these things like fusion centers and da da da, on USA Network at the time. But there's a female lead in the show, Fiona Glenann. But with what they don't do with her that they do now is make it seem like she's super powerful. Like when Fiona can fight in the show, and she's really really good. But she fights like a girl, which is very different, and not fighting like a dude, which is kind of what you see in a lot of popular depictions these days in in just like a standard action show. Which is to say, like, you're using your opponent's weight more.
That's refreshing.
Yeah, and this is something from like the mid 2000s, right?
Early no wonder. No wonder.
Yeah, right. It's exactly that. So number 5, the independence of the body in regard to the soul, of the animal nature in regard to reason. This is the radical overthrowing of human values. Again, and we're noticing at each point here the emancipation, this maximizing the emancipation of these different, rather than thinking of these things as part of the being of humans. You understand? This is about emancipating each of those things from each other. And that's what he's drawing out, as far as I can tell, of what liberalism engenders.
Yeah.
So he says they exalt sexuality. They sacralize it.
Pedophiles.
Dude, I mean, like, whatever. We talked a lot about that last time. Or no, I talked a lot about that at the end of episode 73, of my show, which I'd encourage everybody to listen to.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. That is the Been Awake podcast or Been Awake show.
They reverse the order between the two ends of marriage, procreation and education on the one hand, a lane of concupiscence on the other. What does concupiscence mean again?
I don't know. That's a really
good.
I
thought you would.
Let's look it up. But go ahead.
For it. I'll keep reading. You tell. It's fine. Concupiscence on the other, by determining it as a primary end, carnal pleasure, and the self-fulfillment of the two spouses or the two partners.
It says concupiscence is strong sexual desire / lust. Okay. So it's the carnal aspect of sex, basically.
So reversing the order between marriages. So it's putting the like the physical. It's putting the physical
carnal
before the
pleasure ahead of.
Yeah.
I have to take the merchandise for a spin before I commit to buying it.
Yeah. That will be or you have to try a bunch of stuff before you know it works. Some people that might be accurate, but like it's also but I hate it when people use that to justify breaking off a good relationship.
Yeah.
Like if you're in a good, again, I say this is the consummate single guy, so I just I have a different perspective on this, I suppose. But like when I hear
like C.S. Lewis, I mean, he was brilliant on marriage and love and all of that, but he didn't get married until he was like 59.
All right. I hate that. All right. Well, I don't want that to be my path.
Yeah, don't do that.
I prefer not. That will be the destruction of marriage and of the family. This is without mentioning the aberrations which transform the sanctuary of marriage into a biological laboratory, or which reduce the infant not yet born to a lucrative ingredient in cosmetics.
Yep. Oh, before you move on, if any of you are ever like brokenhearted, a love, I think it's like a love revisited or something like that. Yeah, or a love lost or something like that by C.S. Lewis. It was, oh my God, is like the consummate heartbreak book for a man. Just say because he got married at 59, and he really, really loved that woman, and she died in just a few years after after they were married, and he just had just one thing after another. A really good heartbreak book for a man, and you don't have to admit you like that thing, but we all know, all of us need something like that at the time. I'm telling you right now, I will get the exact title for you and leave it in the description, but it's by C.S. Lewis. I think it's like A Love Revisited or A Love Lost or something like that. And like he literally loved her so much. He died of heartbreak like a year or two later. Like literally just like his body gave out on him. He just like he didn't want to live after she was gone. So
Number 6, the independence of the present with regard to the past, whence the contempt for tradition and the morbid love of novelty under the pretext of progress. This is one of the causes that St. Pius X attributes modernism to. Quoting, "The remote causes seem to us capable of being reduced to 2, curiosity and pride. Curiosity by itself is not wisely regulated, suffices to explain all the errors."
The book is A Grief Observed by C.S. Lewis. That heartbreak novel, really good.
Is not widely regulated, suffices to explain all the errors. This is the opinion of our predecessor, Gregory XVI, who wrote, "It is a lamentable spectacle to see how far the wanderings of human reason go once the spirit of novelty is given way to." Again, just in particular, and you see this demonstrated in a place like Twitter. This is and I think this is I think what is the word they use here? Novelty, but also crap. I just read it. Curiosity, right? And I think the young are inherently curious in all things, and I think so. There's an element of youth to this as well, we might say, which, and by that I mean how far human reason can go once the spirit of novelty is given way to. So instead of because novelty is where you can also find innovation. So of course, a little bit of novelty is a good thing. But if you tell somebody, well, what is novel is basically what is, then you run into the point to allay it to the culture wars of today, where we had this term bisexual and now we have this term pansexual. And what do they mean? They mean the exact same thing.
Yeah.
Right. And in fact, by the way, you can.
Well, no, because I might be willing to sleep with a man or a woman, but not a trans man or a trans woman. That's
right.
just the bridge too far. and so that way you can't be bi. Now you have to be pan because there's more than, one gender. Yeah.
What's really funny is I'm a subscriber to the Gas Digital Network, big fan of, we've talked about Dave Smith, but I also will watch the Real Ass podcast with Louis J. Gomez. It's like, it's a fun background show. It's 3 times a week and whatever. Yeah. I enjoy it sometimes.
Hey, Legion of Skanks right here.
Oh, and I listen to Legion of Skanks every single week. So like, but I am that guy that they joke that, like you come for like Jay or Dave and then you stay for Louis. I am that, like, there's something I enjoy about Louis J. Gomez as a character, as a creator, as a businessman.
He's hilarious.
Here's the point. There's a recent episode that the comedian Ian Fidance was on, and he actually gets into it with the producer about exactly this. I'll try it. I think it was from this week, so it might not be released to the mass audience, but I'll try and clip that out, or at least send people to, because it's what's very fun about that, and what you can experience sometimes with podcasting is just like where you. Because Gas Digital has this reputation of being on the edge and having no boundaries and no limits, there's a freedom within that. And what you had was basically a very honest conversation about why the guy Ian calls himself like bisexual, and then why the producer Natalie, who's like 10 years younger, calls herself pansexual, and she's even kind of like, it's kind of the same thing. It's kind of silly, the distinctions that are being made. Well, why are those distinctions being made? Precisely here, and as it relates to the text that we're reading, it is this subjugation of the will, we might say, to continual novelty. So it's not enough that we have a term that works. Again, it wasn't enough to just say to incorporate the broader gay community into modern society. Now we have to incorporate. Now we have to. It's not even trans,
it's newness, right? For newness' sake.
What's that?
It's like newness for newness' sake.
Yes.
And this always leads you into like the newest absurdities. This is where where the trivialization of novelty, it has led to the absurdity of uniqueness, unique to the absurd. It's like this peacock you think of like the Grammys, where they have every single different kind of dress you can think of, now multiply that by like a million for, for like human passions, where that level of just utter absurdity has just evolved. That's just completely evolved. It's a never-ending game of one-upsmanship in terms of absurdity,
right?
because of liberalism.
And of course, if your goal is novelty, then all we have to do is try and out-novel one another.
Yep.
This is so personally speaking here first, like I like my brother works in fashion currently. I used to like sell suits. I used to be a lot more colorful. My dress used to be a lot more colorful, right? In my early 20s. And like what's fascinating is how much more complete of a person I feel now not doing that. Like and sometimes I miss dressing up, and I gotta work on my wardrobe a little bit and have some like a couple nice suits and stuff like that for the right occasion. I have a lot of them, but they don't all fit. But to the point is like it's like I used to kind of think like, well, I got to put myself together in this like super creative outfit every single day, and I can showcase who I am to the world. Whereas like now I have the exact opposite approach, and in fact, I'm far more creative as a result. And you see this mimicked. Steve Jobs
it's where
does
you
it.
put your focus. You're able to take focus off. Focus is a scarce resource. You're able to take it off those trivial things that really don't matter at all, and now you're able to express yourself using. You're able to put that focus on to expressing your self, not your outward self.
And what is fast fashion predicated on? Novelty.
Exactly.
Even the left recognizes the problems with fast fashion. And of course I always worked for brands that weren't fast fashion, right? It was more about a timeless look, but it's like you don't have to look like an Easter egg, basically.
Yeah.
Well, and also actually interesting point, because like an element of fashion is always about conformity too. And so like there's a degree, like that's one of the reasons why I've adopted like the Henley, where I used to wear a dress shirt all the time. Is that like this is a far like for a lot of business environments, this is a far more appropriate thing for like what I'm wearing right now relative to, but if I was in a law environment, I would be wearing a suit. Or again, in the political environment, you should be wearing a suit because you're going to do battle. Whereas like
unless you're in the South and you want to look like your voters, or victims, voters, then you dress up like, I have my sleeves rolled up. I dress like the common man.
Right. Well, and you see that you see people, that's how they dress politicians in both those ways. Interesting enough, you don't see that with Democrats.
No,
they're far more about, especially with the women, they're far more about the opulence of it, which is interesting thing to ponder.
Oh yeah.
Number 7. And he's got a lot to say about number 7.
Pelosi dresses, don't you?
That what?
You really see that. She dresses like very what's it, Hunger Games. Like he has a very Hunger Games like wardrobe. I just realized that now. You pointed it out.
Any major,
you don't see that with Republican women.
Hillary Clinton's the same thing.
Yep.
It's very
wow. I never noticed that. That's a really you really must have a fashion eye or eye for fashion. I never caught that.
Whereas like and then you see it, but where you see this more represented in women's fashion at the highest levels, whereas men's fashion, the higher up you climb in a dominance hierarchy, the more conformist it becomes.
Really interesting. I've never noticed that before. Huh. I wonder. We need to table this. Let's continue that later in the group chat. That's a really interesting observation. I've never noticed that. That's that's really interesting. Go ahead.
Yeah, I can talk about the philosophy of fashion forever. The independence of the individual.
I want the psychology of it. Yeah.
Well, right, and so much of the philosophy or psychology of fashion is played out in the modern gender narrative as well.
Wow.
If people are watching and you haven't checked out my work, go to beenawake.com, search for Evolution Beats Androgyny. I've talked about it. I wrote an article about it, but kind of covering a little bit of this idea. So 7, the independence of the individual in regard to all of society, all natural authority and hierarchy, independence of children vis-a-vis their parents, of woman with regard to her husband, feminism, women's liberation, he says right afterwards, of the worker in regard to his employer, of the working class towards the bourgeois class struggle. And so his commentary, political and social liberalism is the reign of individualism. The basic unit of liberalism is the individual. And unfortunately, it wasn't the individualism of Mises. That's my commentary.
I know, because that one really isn't. And I read his definition. That's not that's like my definition of tribalism.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's like, or like your association, is voluntary. It might also be involuntary, but you still have a real association. Anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So, but whereas like Rousseau was like no association, basically.
Yeah,
And
except to the general common will, common good.
Yeah.
The individual is supposed to be an absolute subject of rights, the rights of man, without there being a question of duties which bind him to his creator, to his superiors, or to his fellow creatures, or above all, to the rights of God. Let's make that point I made at the beginning, talking about the fact that Adam Smith, who is considered, the father of laissez-faire, we might say, in brief, just to kind of make it simple, he was still concerned with moral obligations, because he also has a book on moral sentiments where he discusses precisely that we can't just use these economic advances by themselves. So this is an interesting point for those of us coming from the libertarian tradition, because of course, while we might not love Adam Smith, we still say that Adam Smith got some stuff right, because the Austrians have a tendency to to talk a lot about the problems with Adam Smith. So it's an interesting point here, because you can still trace in the lineage even where you still have this concern of duties towards other people. Duties, it's worth duty, but it's also worth pointing out here, though, the way duty was corrupted by German, what I would label as German romanticism, that pushes into the Hegelianism and then ultimately, Marxism as well, because of and the idea that the duties of man to his state without anything else intermediating between that, namely a God figure, right? We might say, because of course, if God is love, then
there's no reference to the first cause. It's like you have a broken epistemology with a consequently non-existent metaphysics. So now you have no way of getting, because you have, God as the first cause and God as love. Therefore, you have love as the base layer of your metaphysics, and therefore you can get to all of reality all the rest of reality from there. But if you get rid of that, then, well, yeah, now you're going to have a busted, you will again definitionally have a busted sense-making apparatus that cannot make sense anymore of the rest of reality. This is why we need religion as kind of like, you can't just use reason to get anywhere. You need some sort of guidepost. You need some sort of reference point to make sense of all of the other reference points. And if you're missing one, like you don't have Christ, well, now you have no reference point for making the logical sense of the rest of reality. So it doesn't work anymore. Your sense you're missing a data. It's like connect all the dots, or find all of the connections to all of the dots of reality. And if you're missing one of them, definitionally you're missing an infinite amount of other points.
Well, and and I think what's connected in my mind is just this concept of the mysteries of our faith. So it's not even about closing the loop in a rational sense in that regard from a religious angle too. Sometimes it's also just saying like, this is as far as we can get. Like this is a mystery of our faith. This is like the Trinity is a mystery, right? Like we understand it's one God and three gods and one. It's like one God and three.
Three persons and one God.
Thank you. Yeah, but it's a mystery. It's something that's supposed to be meditated on and kind of, and you see analogies of this in Eastern Buddhism as well. But it's this idea of like, even if you try, you as a human aren't going to be able to grasp this concept in totality, which would of course be completely separated from this, where are we at now? The independence of the, individual to society. So yeah.
And this was like where like, again, you need authority to make sense of it, because you could theoretically reason your way to the idea that, you have, one God who conceives of himself as like three persons. but but it'd be really, really difficult to figure out why, unless it had been previously revealed to you. Well, God is love, and because God is uncreated, therefore he's outside of time, because time is a created thing, and therefore he's basically had a virtually infinite amount of time to intellectualize himself, because he has an intellect, and therefore he can conceive, well, what is my best self, the best kind of self, and he reasons his way to, okay, well, love is the best kind of thing. Love requires a beloved, so therefore, this is where you get the son. This is where the logos comes from, because the first act of God is to intellectualize himself as love, and this creates the whole rest of the universe. But now, he's intellectualized the son, who is his intellectualized perfect self. And because it is more perfect to exist than not to exist, therefore the son exists and has a real personhood. He conceives of his perfect self, and therefore his perfect self becomes real,
Conceived
and therefore
by the Holy Spirit.
And that, well, here's where it gets really fun, because now you have his perfect self, and he loves, what's his most perfect action towards his most perfect self? To love his most perfect self, and therefore, and by far, and because it's his perfect self loves him back, and therefore, because they both do this infinitely. This is that value for value creates more value. Now you get a third person who is the product of their love, the fruit of their love, like the Holy Spirit. This is like this is why you get to, how can a one God conceive of himself as three people? This is how, because he intellectualizes himself and loves his his other persons within himself, and therefore he becomes, one actually becomes three, where it comes two and then becomes three. And of course, when the Holy Spirit is coming and going in between them, well, you have to have something to come and go to. This is where you get the rest of reality from. This is why there's created things outside of it, because you wouldn't just be going to yourself; you'd be going to things outside of yourself. Therefore, he in one act, he conceives of himself perfectly and creates all the rest of reality, which now his love has the ability to go towards, because now there's other things for him to love. So all of this is done through reason and intellect, but you could never guess that, really, unless you were like just straight up told that, but the idea that God is love, is the revelation marker point that allows you to reason your way back to what is God. The answer of what is God, what is the first cause of all reality? Love. That's how you reason your way back to it. And all the rest of reality makes sense now.
Let's continue. Liberalism makes all the natural social hierarchies disappear, but in doing this, in the end, it leaves the individual alone and without defense in regard to the crowd of which he is only an interchangeable element and which swallows him up entirely. The social doctrine of the church, on the contrary, affirms that society is not a shapeless mass of individuals, but an arranged organism of coordinated and hierarchically arranged social groups. The family, the enterprises and trades, then the professional corporations, finally the state. The corporations unite employers and workers for the same profession, for the protection and the promotion of their common interests. The classes are not antagonistic, but naturally complementary. The law called Le Chapelier of June 14th, 1791, by prohibiting the associations, this is killing the guilds, by the way, killed the corporations, which had been the instrument of social peace since the Middle Ages. This law was the fruit of liberal individualism, but instead of freeing the workers, it crushed them. In the 19th century, the assets of the liberal bourgeoisie had crushed the formless mass of workers who had become the proletariat. That's interesting. A way was found at the initiative of the socialists to regroup the workers in trade unions. The trade unions only made the social war worse by extending the facetious opposition of capital and proletariat to the scale of all society. It is known that this opposition, or quote, class struggle, was at the origin of the Marxist theory of dialectical materialism, so that a false social problem created by a false system, communism. Now, since Lenin, the class struggle has become, by means of communist usage, the privileged weapon of the communist revolution. Let us then hold on to this undeniable historical and philosophical truth. Liberalism leads, by its natural propensity, to totalitarianism and to the communist revolution. It can be said that it is the soul of all the modern revolutions and of the revolution itself, in short.
And I want to hone in on that that dialectic what thing oneself, because
Dialectic materialism.
yeah, where you have a view of the world where everything is always like either or. And
Well, no,
the
sorry, because what he's driving at is he's actually driving closer to Marx's teleology. So the idea that
Mhm.
feudalism becomes capitalism, that capitalism becomes socialism, and that socialism becomes communism through the class struggle, and that this is the necessary end of history.
Yeah.
That's what he. I think that's what how
Well,
he's
it's not
using.
just that. What I was saying earlier about how liberalism, has one false dialectic after another. And at the, by the way, for my debate today, at the, that like this kind of one of its probably the best dialectic of, or at least I should say the most destructive, false dialectic that liberalism pushes on the world is that the morality is either consequences or first principles. So you're either a first principleist, in which case you don't give a damn about consequences, or you're a consequentialist, and therefore you don't give a damn about first principles.
Yeah.
And so and it's like it's not. This is these are not mutually exclusive. It's not either or. It's both. And
Mm-hmm.
because and again, it's the liberalism has this broken sense making apparatus that it cannot get its way to truth. And one thing, and so this is where you get this idea that there are a whole bunch of things that are just a natural, like faith and reason. It's like, oh, it's got to be one or the other. It's got to be blind belief or hard intellectual sense making.
Right.
It's like no, not at all. Those are not the only two choices.
Well, in all of these too, what we're seeing is the emancipation of, right? It's the separating out of these things that, again, under a more Catholic understanding, would be considered holistic. They would actually be considered part of the same organism, if you will. And I think that point that you brought up of consequentialism versus first principles, and where does that come from? Well, that comes from, in part, I would argue, relying on only the primacy of reason. And I don't know if you want,
Yeah.
I don't know if you want to, but I want to. The question
ahead.
everything in the chat says, so in short, discard. So I'm assuming he's trying to interpret what we're talking about, which says that he's not listening in good faith. So, that's
It's
fine.
weird. I didn't understand that, because it seems like he's agreeing with us for like the first 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, or 7 so 6 things where he's actually making agreement points, and it seems like he's making great points. And then there's this one which I'm assuming is poorly worded, but
does he make more points than that? I'm talking about in the chat. There's a guy in the chat who says, so in short, discard of logic and rely on positivism. I'm not sure how you could come to that conclusion from what we're talking about here. So let's do away with praxeology and archotropism then. This is well, I mean, this is the binary in effect, right? Because of course what we're doing by talking about this book is not to throw away praxeology per se, is not to throw away your archotropism framework or my frameworks that I have.
Yeah.
It's not that. We're adding to the symphony. We're showing it. We're bringing in a different portion, a different way. And frankly, we're also just reading a book. We're engaging in an academic pursuit. This is about trying to understand the words of somebody who wrote at one point in time. And by doing so, by the way, we are necessarily using our logic. So again, the entire thing is there. I mean, whatever. Obviously, this guy doesn't like you. I don't know.
It seems like he's agreeing with us for the rest of it. I'm just going to assume that's poorly worded, but yeah, I did interpret it the way you did, but it just seems poorly worded.
Mhm.
But yeah, it's like to say that basically they make the exact opposite conclusion that, your senses are not always reliable. Therefore, you have to rely on your reason to make sense of it, of everything. So therefore, your reason has to be, perfectly sound. And no, this is like the sense making is, your sixth sense is sense making. This is by far the weakest sense in most people, because most people, like they're really good at, saying, a man is a man and, the sky is blue. Everyone's really good at that, by using their senses. There's a lot of agreement there. And like even in all of the hard, by the way, like Descartes almost at one time threw out philosophy as a science, because he said, if it were a real science, everyone would basically agree, and they would agree on the things they disagreed on. Like people can disagree on the idea that we have no idea that, like, well, no, like everybody agrees that we cannot reconcile quantum gravity with relativity, and all of they disagree about why, but they all agree that we don't understand it first. and then they're proving it. Even when they disagree, they really agree quite a lot.
Mhm.
And it's because they agree on everything. It's like the one kinds of disagreements are presume an agreement on everything. But whereas with philosophy, because this is devoid of reality, it's supposed to be pure reason. This is why no one agrees. So yeah, it like to point out the true weakness of our sixth sense, that is, sense making itself, which makes, again, harmonizes and makes sense of all of the other five senses. That this is not in no way is this the master sense, because this one gets it wrong so much, even though we can, the other five get it right nearly perfectly with like camera precision action.
Well, how much of our communication is nonverbal, right?
Exactly.
Like when we're actually in, Dan Soder has a bit in his special where he's like, he doesn't like online dating because he can't smell the other person. It's like, it's so good. I mean, the dude's hilarious.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
It's such a good, he's like, yeah, I don't like it because I can't smell the other person, right? Because there's just because there is something different when you're in front of somebody and you're actually in a room with people.
Mm-hmm. You're communicating so many other things through your nonverbal cues.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like your body language, your minor pheromones, all these kinds of things. That we're always sending signals like that, and
mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So like to point out that no, actually it's the other. It's not the Kant was completely wrong, because he was like, oh, your senses are not reliable, therefore you need your sense making apparatus. Well, no. Your senses are really your five senses are really, really good, and they agree with basically everyone else's. We are all seeing, hearing, touching, tasting basically the same reality. It's our sense making apparatus that's like the really unreliable one. To point this out is not to reject reason. It is to say that one of these things is not, one of these six senses is not like the others. Is or at least nowhere near as good as the others. That's that's what we're saying. And that
Well, and moreover, again, we've already said that for both of us, our goal includes liberty. We're just what we're demonstrating in part is that liberty doesn't have to, despite all the work done to make you think this, liberty doesn't exist. Liberty can exist without without modern liberalism.
Oh yeah, in fact, it existed quite a lot more before liberalism.
And I'll bring up something I might have brought this up last one, but this is why I like Charles Haywood's definition of leftism, where he talks about maximal emancipation and maximal egalitarianism. So it's this idea that we must separate ourselves from everything, and we must consider everything as being equal. And
equally unknowable, basically.
Mm-hmm.
That's where it's like they're all equally. The rest of reality is equally unknowable. Therefore, I should just treat everything as if it's the same.
Right. Well, okay. So in skepticism, really when you look at a skeptical epistemology, the skeptical epistemology is going to show you all the little ways in which you can't trust your senses. That's kind of the point. And to also then show, like in the case of Montaigne, the way animals exert the same kind of sense making, or same ability to perceive reality, we might say. And so then, like, what good are these things that we consider to be good, like reason, so on and so forth?
Yeah. Well, gosh, I just realized something from here that Haywood's definition even goes right back to my definition of time preference for power. Because why do the liberals, why do the left have a high time preference for power because they're physically trying to, they're the subject, forcing everyone else, forcing the rest of the objective world to conform to it. That's where their high time preference for power, I mean, it presumes a high time preference for power that they that Hayward's definition right there of like maximum egalitarianism, because of this busted sense making apparatus, liberalism must presume left, that idea right there would still presume a high time preference for power. So my archotropism definition is really still is the master definition. However you define the left, it will always presume a high time preference for power.
The Jolly Heretic, Dr. Edward Dutton, big fan. I like his stuff, but he had I should have watched it before we came on, but he had a thing where he talks about how evolutionarily speaking, you can actually figure out why radical what's the word we use? Not radicalization, polarization occurs over generations. And so I'd encourage people, you can look it up, and it's one of the videos he did within the last year. I think his videos are short. They're like 20-30 minutes long. But one thing I had been kind of thinking of this week, because I talk a lot about biological temperament and how that's also an element of the left-right dynamic that we perceive. But I was also just thinking about in general how democratic forms of government emphasize this, right? And emphasize this idea, emphasize in particular biological differences in personality and temperament, and set them at odds with each other. Again, walking through progressive democratic government, if you want to try and make it more precise. Why? Because the progressivism is about emancipating all these things from each other, and progressivism is about the atomized individual in the way that we're talking about it here. What is useful for that is the atomized individual can easily be subsumed to a common will, a la Rousseau, and therefore making not the object but the subject the means by which we determine the world. It's just interesting to even think about the fact that because it's like, oh, we got to have the idea of a healthy debate. I tweeted out one time that coming from a large family, and this is something that's lost considering what is it, 2.5 kids in the US still, right? And we have, and Americans in particular are separated from their extended families. This is why, whereas you don't see that with like immigrant communities and people in other countries where they tend to live with multiple generations at once. But I was thinking about, but I think what's really helpful from coming from a big family is you learn how to love different kinds of people. And democracy in politics set that at odds. And so when you combine the democracy with the progressive liberalism, I'll make that addition, because I think a lot of what he's going through, you see that really here is really, this is about progressivism. Now, I'm completely understanding of the point that liberalism was unable to stop progressivism and communism, and so therefore eventually became them, right? And I think that's the work that we have to do now.
Liberalism is a becoming. Yeah, I mean, it's in the system. It's presumed in the system that this thing, liberalism, is going to become something else and mutate.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's in there.
But to the point of how then, when you remove your natural connections that you would have throughout an extended family, where you have I have cousins who are not necessarily who I'm closer to, and cousins who I'm not as close to. I'm from a big family, which is why I'm making this point. And I have 3 younger siblings, but I also have uncles and aunts who had 8 kids. So to the point is, you learn when you're from a big family, you learn how to love different kinds of people. And you're kind of removed from that in a society that encourages people to have as few children as possible and to not be connected with extended family. What happens there as a consequence?
Yeah, and
as a consequence of that, you're more likely to associate with people who are temperamentally similar to you, which creates a network effect. What does that network effect do? Well, it reinforces the idea that if somebody is different from me, then they must be evil. And so what do we see? The left, who has power of everything going on right now, the left who has the power in all major institutions today, the worst thing they can think of is a right winger.
Exactly. And I mean, you just said it right there. With with urbanization, what is the domain of liberals? The urban environment. Why? And what's interesting about the urban environment is that when you move off the farm, when you're on the farm, children are free labor, so you actually have an incentive to want quite a few of them. Whereas when you're in the city, children are kind of just noisy pieces of really, really, really expensive furniture. And they're also not very, very unenjoyable, basically, because they're unproductive to you, and all they do is consume your wealth. So you naturally want to have as few of them as possible. And so and so what that kind of what that leads to is basically this whole civilization of I'm sorry, what you were just saying about why. Oh, shoot, I fucking brain farted. Damn it.
I was talking about so there's an evolutionary case for polarization, and I think democracy amplifies it.
Okay.
And if you can't love somebody who's different than you.
Oh, right? Big families. There we go.
Yeah, big families. Yeah. And I think there's a point of you can't also, like, if you don't know, what's the point about like hating something? You can't hate what you don't actually love, right? And
yeah,
because really the opposite of love is indifference. It's not hate. Hate is still something
there's
you
multiple
can feel.
Opposites, but yeah,
because
it's a central first cause. This is why it's going to have multiple first opposites, like pride, and which is an inverted love instead of outverted love. Or you have hate, which instead of willing someone's good, maximum good, you wish their maximum evil and will that. It's because hatred seeks destruction. That essence of destruction. You could also say it's fear, whereas because love is a first cause, a force of attraction. Whereas fear is a repellent. And this is why. And again, this one way you can just check what. That love is the first cause of reality is if it's the first cause, you should find quite a number of opposites, from it, depending on which aspect of it you're talking about.
Yeah. No, I think that works 100%.
Anyway, anything else? That's the end of it.
No, that's the end of chapter 2. Chapter 3 will be next week.
Next week, same time. Don't miss it. And go ahead and plug your stuff.
Yeah, absolutely, guys. If you're not familiar with me already, please go to beenawake.com. Subscribe with your email address. I cover news, philosophy, and mindset over there. A lot of the kind of analysis that you're getting here, but in more of a news cycle environment where we're playing off of the stories of today. So really encourage you. Please go there. You can follow me on all social media at the LB Muniz.
And sometime next week, we're going to be reading, part 1 of his essay, "The Post-Libertarian Moment," to really explain in depth, what that post-libertarian moment is about. There is no post-libertarianism. Just spoiler alert, that doesn't exist, and he explains why.
Yeah, and that's the thing that people are going to embarrass. In our circles, it's you know what? Here's the funny part. It's like, oh, there's only 12 of them. So, but we're not going to pay attention to the essay that the one guy wrote that the 12 agree with. Like, go get over yourselves, people out there. Like, and again, I'm being a little bit of a dick right now, but that's only because, that's only because I wrote the fucking essay. It's like, well, I think it's this. Well, it's not. It's very easy to create monsters in your mind. And it's very easy to beat those monsters when they're monsters of your own creation. Like, again, you and I don't have.
This is why people who argue with us honestly are generally, they generally become us, or they become our fans or followers and stuff. People who, because when you're actually seeking truth and you're actually talking to us, it's like, oh, all of a sudden these guys are making really good points. They're not the monsters at all. They're not the caricature clown world straw man that I had dreamed up in my mind, or that other people had described to me, and through their anti-heresy mechanism of smearing people.
Precisely. Well, and even if the Catholicism of this, let's say the Catholicism of this is giving you an emotional reaction. Well, that's something you have to work on. What I mean? To the person who's having that emotional reaction to it. It's like, you and I have different perspectives on the Catholic faith, but we both come from that same faith. And and like we're using that because it's something that's lasted for 2,000 years.
Yeah, and by the way, also if you haven't seen my other show with Keith Knight on Tom Woods' book, Tom Woods, his book on how the Catholic Church built all of Western civilization. It's like if it's like again, it's lasted for 2,000 years and it built everything that is good, still good about Western civilization from the ground up. And after 200,000 years of virtually no progress, no human progress at all. And so when you see that and you're like, and you just dismiss the Catholic Church, you're dismissing the institution that built everything around you, and you think it was just by accident. You think it was just idiocy or ignorance, or it's like clearly they were onto something. And when we got rid of them as the heads of our government, basically, 500 years ago, we've been on a really like on the downward slopes, basically, where we were still going. We had quite a lot of momentum, but the more and more we've gotten, the rate of progress really slowed down over time, and right around the 20th century, it reversed. So there hasn't been much progress at all, and we're going backwards now. The further and further we've gotten away from having the Catholic Church as basically the head of all the monarchs.
Yeah.
The guy all the monarchs had to look to was the Pope. Basically, he was the boss of Europe. And so, like, clearly, this force, this institution that built everything, is like, better learn everything good about it, because again, people were way freer under the Catholic monarchs of Europe. We know that. So clearly they were onto something. They knew something that we didn't. And when we got away from them, it screwed everything up. So it's like, let's not dismiss this institution that gave us far more liberty than we've ever had in the past. Like dollar for dollar, liberty for liberty. Nobody did it better than the Catholic Church. So, and if you want proof, go read Tom Woods' book on how the Catholic Church built Western civilization. And you can also see my summary analysis and response to it with Keith Knight, who is another good Catholic of Liberty Twitter. So that is a really, so yeah, as you say, if you are having an emotional reaction to the Catholic Church, that's your problem. And really is your problem. And it isn't the church's problem, because again, the church built everything good around about civilization, and you're having an emotional reaction to the organization that did all that. So everything you think is good, the Catholic Church built it. Yeah, and you're having a reaction to it. What does that say about you? Must not like logic, truth, reason, and all of the stuff that makes civilization work. So your belief in liberalism, your belief in like libertarianism as the apex of liberalism, they must all be in contravention to whatever built everything good around you that you supposedly believe in. And by the way, for this guy in the chat, it's like oh no, I'm sorry, I misunderstood. It's this narco-Republican guy who's agreeing with us on everything.
Yeah.
Whereas, it's I misread it the whole time. This other guy questioned everything. Oh, okay. Yeah, this guy's a retard. Never mind. Yeah, it's the guy who was agreeing with us and was really cool was that narco-Republican guy. And I just misread it. I don't know how I did that. This question everything guy is a real fucking doofus.
Well,
so.
And it also looks like he just popped in and popped out. So he was just trying to stir shit up. No worries.
Yeah. All right, guys. That's it. Take care. Oh, wait.
I was gonna say, Mises GOP.